The last light of dusk was fading through the workshop window when I finished polishing the carburetor on the old Chevy. At 42, my life in Ridgewood boiled down to working at the auto shop I inherited from my dad and spending quiet nights at my isolated house on the outskirts of town. My name's Daniel, a man of few words and lots of scars, not all of them visible. 3 years ago, after Susan left taking more than just her suitcases, I dove into work like you dive into the deep sea, trying to escape the noise of my own thoughts. Loneliness became a constant companion, and the rumble of engines replaced the conversations I no longer had. If this story touched you and sparked your curiosity, don't forget to leave a like so more people can see the power of an unexpected meeting. My house is about 20 minutes from town, a wooden and stone building surrounded by pines that cast long shadows at the end of the day. The smell of motor oil never quite leaves my hands, no matter how much soap I use. It mixes with the scent of firewood burning in the fireplace during Oregon's harsh winters. Every morning starts the same, a strong black coffee while I watch the sunrise through the kitchen window and the distant howl of some lagging coyote. I drive my truck along the winding road to the shop, where I spend the day among tools and broken cars that seem to tell their own road stories. Sometimes, just to break the monotony, I go fishing in the stream near the property. The cold water running through my fingers gives me a brief sense of peace, as if all the unresolved issues could just be washed away by the current. On a Thursday, that seemed just like every other. The sound of a failing engine broke the afternoon's quiet. A dark blue 90s Mustang was parked haphazardly in front of the shop. The guy who got out was about my age, with brown hair flecked with gray at the temples, and a slightly lost look in his eyes. "I've been on the road for 4 hours and this damn car just started breaking down in the middle of nowhere," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Thomas. I was on my way to Portland when fate decided to bring me to your shop." Thomas was a wildlife photographer, traveling around to document nature for a well-known magazine. His talkative nature stood in sharp contrast to my usual silence. As he examined the car, he wandered around the shop checking out the old tools hanging on the wall. "It's gonna take at least 2 days," I said after a thorough inspection. "The head gasket is shot." "And where's the nearest hotel?" he asked, running his hand through his hair. "About 20 kilometers from here, and it's probably packed because of the state fair," I replied, knowing there was only a tiny place in town. The chance that brought a stranger to my door turned into an unexpected opportunity when I offered him the guest room at my place. Thomas accepted gratefully, and on the way back, we stopped to pick up some groceries. At the local market, his ease in chatting with strangers really highlighted our differences. "Can you really live so isolated?" he asked as we put together a simple meal in my kitchen. His hands chopped vegetables with the same precision that mine used to take apart engines. "Silence has its own language if you learn to listen to it," I replied, surprising even myself with the impromptu philosophy. After dinner, Thomas insisted on doing the dishes while I got the fireplace going. He showed me some amazing photos from his travels: bears in Alaska, deserts in Arizona, snow-covered mountains. Each picture seemed to tell a story of freedom I'd forgotten even existed. The next morning, Thomas joined me at the shop. While I worked on the Mustang, he snapped photos of the old tools and the glints of sunlight on the car's bodies. His presence brought a lightness to the place I hadn't felt in a long time. On the second day, a hailstorm battered the area, forcing us to close the shop early. We got back home under a sky that had darkened too soon. The power went out, leaving us at the mercy of the fireplace's flames and a few candles scattered around the room. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm running away instead of really living," I admitted, surprised by my own sudden vulnerability. The whiskey we shared had loosened the knots that kept my stories locked away. Thomas fell silent for a moment, his eyes mirroring the flickering flames. "We're all running from something, Daniel. The difference is, some of us just take pictures of the scenery while we're at it," he finally replied. That's when I realized that Thomas's presence was starting to tear down the walls I'd built around me. The thought of finishing his car repair filled me with an unusual unease. For the first time in years, the loneliness I'd so carefully nurtured began to feel like a burden too heavy to carry alone. The warmth from the fireplace created a refuge against the storm that kept battering the roof. Shadows danced on the walls like restless spirits as the whiskey made us more honest. Thomas talked about far-off places with a contagious passion, his eyes lit by an inner flame even brighter than the fire before us. "What about you, Daniel? What's the place that touched your soul the most?" he asked, leaning slightly toward me. Something in the way he asked, or maybe the mix of alcohol with the forced isolation from the storm, made me confess a long-held desire. "I've never left Oregon," I replied, feeling the weight of that admission. "There's a map in my office drawer covered in marks for places I meant to visit. Susan. She used to say we had time. Then she was gone, and the map got put away." Thomas got up fluidly and reached out his hand. "Show me." I led him to the little room I called my office, where technical books about mechanics shared, space with some unfinished novels. The drawer creaked as I opened it, revealing a map yellowed with age, marked with little red circles in places like the Grand Canyon, Yosemite, Mount Rainier. "Deferred dreams," I murmured, feeling a lump in my throat. Thomas moved closer, his shoulder brushing against mine as he studied the map. The warmth of that casual touch sent an electric jolt down my spine. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. "It's not too late," he whispered, his warm breath mingling with the smell of whiskey. His fingers brushed mine over the map, and that simple touch broke something inside me. A dam of emotions held back for so long that I'd forgotten they even existed. The air between us grew heavy with unspoken possibilities, tension building like the electricity before a lightning strike. "Thomas, I began, unable to find the right words. He gently placed a finger on my lips. "Don't overthink it, Daniel. Some moments only come once in a lifetime." The distance between us shrank like drifting continents moving against the flow of time. My heart pounded in my chest like a misfiring engine. The soft brush of his breath against my face awoke feelings I thought had died years ago, buried under layers of self-imposed loneliness. When his hand touched my face, hesitation gave way to a silent certainty. Time seemed to slow, a film playing, frame by frame. Every second carried the weight of an eternity. In that room lit only by the occasional flash of lightning through the curtains, I let my long-dormant instincts take over. Our lips met with the urgency of lost travelers finding shelter in a storm. Thomas tasted of whiskey and promises, his stubble creating a delicious friction against my skin. His experienced hands roamed over my shoulders as if mapping unexplored territory, each touch awakening nerve endings I'd forgotten I had. I felt heat spread through my body like gasoline ignited by a renegade spark. "Is it okay?" he whispered, his eyes searching mine for permission. I didn't answer with words. Instead, I pulled him closer, our breaths merging in a synchronized dance. While the storm raged outside, we made our own tempest behind four walls, imperfect and intense. Our way to the bedroom became a journey punctuated by stops as we discovered each other against walls and furniture, as if every inch of the house had to witness our newfound connection. The darkness was our accomplice, letting us explore unknown territories guided only by touch and desire. In the dim light of the bedroom, our clothes fell away like the last defenses of a besieged city. With every piece removed, not only was skin revealed but also stories written in scars and marks that told of lives lived separately until that moment. Thomas guided me like a boat navigating turbulent waters, with a confidence both intimidating and fascinating. His fingers slid over my skin like a virtuoso pianist playing a long-forgotten sonata, finding notes I didn't even know existed in my own body. Our bodies intertwined in an unlikely choreography, as the occasional flash of lightning carved shadows and contours into the half-light. The heavy air of desire wrapped around us like a blanket woven from sighs and muffled moans. Time lost its linear meaning as we discovered each other in ancient rhythms, like two lost constellations finally aligning after millennia of wandering alone through the cosmos. The storm outside seemed to answer our intensity, thunder marking the moments of our deepest connection, as if distant applause from a voyeuristic universe. Thomas murmured words in my ear that were both poetry and blasphemy, each syllable caressing not just my senses but reaching deeper places. When we finally surrendered to the climax of that unexpected journey, it was like a silent explosion that rebuilt entire universes within us. My muscles trembled from the effort of containing sensations too powerful for one body. Thomas held my face in his hands, his eyes fixed on mine like anchors, keeping me from getting completely lost in the storm of sensations. For a moment, we existed outside time and space, two planets in perfect orbit, only to collapse on top of each other afterwards, exhausted and transformed. Our heavy breathing the only sound besides the now softer rain outside. Dawn arrived, with an unforgiving brightness that lit not only up the room but also the darkest corners of my mind. I woke up feeling the weight of Thomas's arm on my chest, his rhythmic breath against my neck. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear sky and freshly washed earth, a metaphor too perfect to ignore. I stayed still, afraid that any movement might shatter that moment suspended between yesterday and today. Vivid flashes of the previous night returned. The touch of Thomas's hands, the warmth of his skin against mine, whispered words in the dark that now, in the morning light, felt both more real and somehow impossible. Thomas woke slowly, his eyes meeting mine with an intimacy that disarmed me. There was no regret in his look, just a quiet curiosity, as if he were memorizing the contours of my face in this new light. "Good morning," he said simply, his voice husky with sleep. "Good morning," I replied, surprised at the ease of a moment I'd assumed would be laden with awkwardness. He propped himself on an elbow, watching me carefully. "You're overthinking it. I can see it in your eyes." "How can I not think? Yesterday I was... and now I'm..." "What exactly?" I asked. Thomas smiled, the kind of smile that lit up his whole face. "You're still the same Daniel, just one who knows a little more about himself now." I let his words sink in slowly, like water soaking into dry ground. "In photography," he continued, his fingers distractedly tracing patterns on my chest, "we learn that light reveals, but it's the shadows that give depth. We spend our lives avoiding our shadows when we should be exploring them." I got up and walked over to the window. The world outside looked both familiar and entirely new. The trees were still in the same spot, but I saw them with different eyes, like an explorer who, after years of studying the same map, finally discovers uncharted territory inside himself. "I never imagined..." I began, then stopped. The words felt inadequate to describe the transformation stirring within me. "No one ever does," Thomas replied to my unfinished thought, standing up to join me at the window. "That's why we need to live, not just exist." That morning passed in a strange bubble of time as we made coffee together and talked like old friends sharing a precious secret. The intimacy of the previous night had opened doors inside me that I never even knew were closed. "The car will be ready today," I said, as we washed the dishes side by side, my shoulder occasionally brushing against his, each touch sending tiny shivers down my spine. Thomas nodded, a slight furrow crossing his brow. And then you head off to Portland," I finished, feeling a hollow pit in my stomach as I said the words. I looked within and realized something fundamental had changed. The loneliness that once felt like a safe harbor now seemed more like a prison of my own making. Thomas hadn't just touched my body. He'd awakened parts of my soul that I'd long thought dead. The afternoon came too quickly. At the shop, I put the final touches on the Mustang's engine, my mechanical moves a sharp contrast to the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Thomas was photographing the sunset on the nearby road, his silhouette against the orange sky like the embodiment of all the roads I had never taken. The engine purred perfectly when I turned the key. Job done. Time nearly up. "It's ready to roll," I announced when he returned, tucking his camera into his bag. Thomas looked at the car and then at me, a melancholy smile forming on his lips. "Thank you. You work miracles with these machines." A heavy silence filled the air, the kind loaded with unspoken words. The clock on the shop wall ticked away, the seconds that were counting down to an inevitable goodbye. "I've got to get to Portland tomorrow for a magazine meeting," he finally said, running his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign of restlessness. "Of course," I replied, feeling a pang in my chest. "It's your job." While Thomas was packing up his things in the car, I couldn't help but consider asking him to stay, or maybe even suggesting that I come along. But the words got stuck in my throat, choked by decades of self-protection and fear. "Daniel," he called out, coming over with something in his hand. "I want you to have this." It was a framed photograph, a shot he'd taken that morning, showing my house at dawn with the fog lifting among the pines. The captured light transformed the ordinary scene into something almost magical. "To remind you that even the most familiar places can be seen with new eyes," he explained. I took the frame in my hands, feeling the weight of all the things left unsaid. "Thomas, Don't say anything you don't mean," he gently interrupted. "Just know that Portland is only 4 hours away." His eyes stared into mine with an intensity that disarmed me, as if he could see through all the layers of protection I'd built over the years. "I've got 2 days' worth of work there," he continued. "After that, I was thinking of exploring the coast for a few weeks. They say there are auto shops along the way that always need a good pro for a checkup." My heart raced as I realized the unspoken invitation in his words. "My map," I finally said, finding my voice. "The one with all the marked places. It's still in the drawer," he finished. "Or you can take it out." On the horizon, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of red and orange, a moment of decision frozen in time. "I've never done anything like this," I admitted, feeling fear and excitement battle inside me. Thomas smiled. "That's exactly why it's worth it." We stood side by side, watching the sunset, 2 men on the edge of a metaphorical precipice. Freedom was within reach, just 1 step away. "How long do you think I'd need to pack? My things?" I finally asked, feeling a huge weight lift off my shoulders with every word. The smile that lit up Thomas's face was like a sunrise. "Depends on how long you really need to take." Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to access more stories like this. 3 days later, I was looking out at the Pacific Ocean for the first time in my life. Its endless waters stretched out to the horizon, where they met the sky in a perfect line. Thomas captured the moment with his camera, but I preferred to etch it directly into my memory. The taste of salt on my lips, the roar of the waves, the feeling of total freedom. I had left the shop in the capable hands of Mike, my longtime assistant, with a promise to return in a few weeks. Or maybe not. The road ahead was like an open invitation, and every sunrise brought new possibilities. That map, once tucked away in a drawer, was now spread out on the Mustang's back seat, marked with new circles and routes penciled in. It wasn't just a distant dream anymore. It was a plan in action. That morning, while Thomas was still asleep, I wrote a letter to Susan, indirectly thanking her for leaving. Sometimes the hardest losses prepare us for the most significant encounters. I left the letter unsent, not for her, but for myself, as a way to close one chapter so I could start a new one. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked as he approached with his camera hanging around his neck, the wind tousling his hair. "I was thinking about how a simple mechanical failure can completely change the course of a life," I replied, feeling the irony of that truth. He interlaced his fingers with mine, a gesture that still surprised me with its natural ease. "Life is made up of seemingly accidental meetings and inevitable goodbyes. The secret is knowing which encounters are worth postponing the farewells for." The sun began to set over the ocean, a display of colors that no photograph, no matter how masterful, could fully capture. Just like no word could ever fully express the transformation I was feeling. For years I had hidden in the routine like someone locked away in a fortress. Now I understood that true courage was leaving the familiar behind, daring to explore not only the uncharted territories of the world, but the unexplored areas of yourself. Thomas had taught me that there are many kinds of freedom, and that some of them can only be found when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. That the most important maps aren't the ones showing roads and mountains, but the ones that guide us through the labyrinths of the heart. And now, facing the vast ocean and the infinite possibilities unfolding before me, I finally understood. We're not defined by the paths we avoid out of fear, but by the roads we choose to travel out of courage. Night was falling, and Thomas suggested we find somewhere to have dinner. Tomorrow we'd head south toward a small fishing village he knew, and then, who knows? The map was open, just like my heart. If any part of this story touched you, if some corner of your soul recognized that longing for freedom, that desire to have the courage to follow new paths, leave your like on this video. Life's too short to be stuck in emotional workshops, fixing the same broken engines day after day. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that go beyond the surface, that explore the depths of what it means to be truly alive, not just to exist. Because in the end, we all deserve to find our own Thomas, or be that Thomas in someone else's life. The person who helps us realize it's never too late to pull that map out of the drawer and start the journey. Subscribe to the channel, and leave your like to access more stories like this.